9:05. So I think we'll go ahead and get underway. And thanks, Rick, for your message there in the chat. As you maybe could guess from our timing in doing this now, we're really recognizing that folks are starting to think a little bit about what your students might be wanting to do for the summer, and we're gonna make the pitch for reading whole books being a significant part of that time spent this summer. We imagine we're probably preaching to the choir in the sense that the group of you who decided to join us for a conversation about this evening are perhaps yourselves big readers. And we may inquire of you about some books that have meant something to you over the years as we talk a little bit about cultivating that with our students. But to begin with, I'll introduce myself and then pass it over to my colleague Kate Cusick in a minute to introduce herself as well. And I think we're going to have a relatively small group, so we certainly invite you as you feel comfortable to jump in along the way with questions, thoughts. We're eager to just generate some discussion here and welcome folks feeling more like it's a real conversation in a room since we are relatively small in number tonight. So my name is Emily Pressman. I'm the Dean of Teaching and Learning at St. Andrews, as well as a teacher of both history and English. This is, I think, my 23rd year at St. Andrews. So I've been teaching in St. Andrews classrooms for much of my career. And all of them have very much been reading classrooms in various kinds of ways and very much in print as well, which we'll talk a little bit about over the course of our conversation. So I'm excited to talk about reading and the ways that we both work in our classrooms to cultivate a love of reading and the kind of specifically deep reading that we'll talk a little bit about the distinction between deep reading and other forms of reading. But it's really a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'll turn things over to my colleague Kate Cusick to introduce herself and then we'll get underway.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. It's really great to see you all here tonight, talking about books, one of my favorite topics. So this is my fourth year at St. Andrews. I've been in education for over 20 and at a range of different school types. So in my 20 years, I've worked at public, charter, day schools, day and boarding schools, all girls schools. So I have a range of experience working with texts and classrooms. And I'm really excited to talk about whole books and the way in which we do it at St. Andrews and how great it's been. And I think it's just it's amazing that it's back in the news. It's a big topic right now. And it's something that St. Andrews has done really well, well before I arrived here. Um, so yeah, I think Emily and I are going to sort of tag team throughout the process tonight, and we look forward to you all sharing also your insights as well with us. So thank you.
So to start out, we thought we would just give you a little bit of context for some things that perhaps unsurprisingly that we've been reading that are informing some of the things that we'll talk about today. So one is a book by Marianne Wolf. I just dropped it into the chat called Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World. And Marianne Wolf is really sort of for the purposes of this conversation, the perfect person to be giving us some insights in terms of reading and the power of reading, because she both trained as a scholar of English literature and as a neuroscientist. And she's written this really wonderful book, Reader Come Home. And you can also find her. This is for those who enjoy podcasts. Just dropped a link for the podcast. Beware if you click it that it may start playing on you. But Marianne Wolf talks about and makes an argument about what deep reading gives us. And again, she draws the distinction between the kind of skimming reading that we have come to do, reading for information, and again, in a sort of pretty superficial kind of way that especially screens encourage. The difference between that and the kind of deep reading that allows us, as she puts it, to actually change our consciousness, and the kind of deep reading that allows us to she argues to actually understand the world in different kinds of ways. As she puts it, Um, so she's describing different levels on which we can participate in the text. And she says, we can use our ability to take on another perspective, to read in a whole different way. We're entering almost the theory of mind of another and also their feelings. This is a totally different form of reading than the one that we're talking about when we're saying we're reading for information. And that's the kind of reading that we're asking our students to be doing that kind of deep reading that yields, as Marianne Wolf puts it, insight, or she even uses the word really intentionally, epiphany. And I think that's a really striking thing to think about what deep reading can really achieve. She talks about, as she puts it, quote, ever deeper levels of complexity that allow us to perceive the beauty of carefully chosen words when we're reading for that purpose. The beauty for understanding at the deepest level, we have to really figure out how to use print and how to engage with print in this deep kind of way, where students would be using critical and analytical capabilities in a way that they don't when they're just reading on a screen. So this is one of the reasons that we so deeply, from a sort of student learning sense, believe in the reading of whole books. But we also believe in the artistry and the sort of humanity that reading whole books, works of literature and also of nonfiction, but what that cultivates in our students. And so that's really at the heart of our work in our classrooms, particularly, but not exclusively, in the humanities. So I'm going to turn things over to Kate to talk a little bit about some of the things that the English department does, and I can talk a little bit about some of the ways that we're cultivating deep reading in history classes as well. And we'll sort of shift gears then to talk a little bit more about the summer and about maybe ideas that you have, ideas that we have about cultivating this kind of love of reading and deep reading in students.
All right, thanks, Emily. I realized after I introduced myself, I actually didn't give you my title. I'm the English department chair this year, starting this year. So I'm an English teacher and the English department chair moving forward for us. So thank you again, Emily. And so the English department, we have really grounded ourselves in reading entire texts, which to the point of my previous introduction, it's not the case in a lot of the schools that I've actually worked at in the past. So and we do a lot of whole texts from our summer reading, which we started requiring this year. So ninth grade, we had a novel Gather, which was an excellent introduction into sort of community for our students for the third form. And then from there in the third form, they read quite a few whole texts. They move into, they have Slaughterhouse-Five, they have The Great Gatsby. They have Their Eyes Were Watching God as well. And a lot of these texts are actually, in my experience in other schools, higher level texts as well. So not only are we reading entire novels, we're also reading really complex texts with a lot of really deep, complex issues and topics. So, and we work through those really with a lot of intention as well, which is really an excellent part of our curriculum. And to Emily's point, the deep reading that we do really goes into understanding others and understanding each other. And one of the great aspects of the English classrooms, I'm sure you all have been in our rooms to see the round tables. So working on our discussion skills and encouraging the students to understand how to enter and exit conversations with each other respectfully and building, not competing. It's one of the aspects that we really talk about with discussion. So in 10th or English 2, we move on to whole texts such as Salvage the Bones. And then we also do Pride and Prejudice, which again was frequently a higher level text for older students in other schools that I've worked at. And these are just a few of the whole novels or whole texts that we're reading. We also did Station 11 as an introductory text for the summer reading. 11th grade, we do passing. We also do, there's sort of a choice of Frankenstein or All the Pretty Horses, along with a big poetry exhibition that the students do in the spring. And then senior year, the big exhibition text is Beloved. We do some short story lead ups to that, but we do a real deep, slow read of Beloved by Toni Morrison, which I think is really the capstone for a lot of the students prior to their exhibition capstone, because it's the first time that they really read a real complex text as slowly and as deeply as they do to understand the complexity of what Morrison's doing in that text. Um, so yeah, we do a lot of work, really close reading the entirety of a novel. In addition to, in between there, we do some sprinkling of short stories and poetry, to sort of mix and mingle the genres amongst each other. So yeah, those are just a few of the pieces and the literature that we touch base with. And uh, the students really, I got a really nice Christmas card from one of my seniors who said she's really excited because this is the first time she's wanted to talk about literature outside of the classroom in a really long time, and beloved of all the texts was the one that sort of inspired her. And I that card I'm going to hold on to forever because that's exactly what we try to do. It's deep reading, but it's also learning to love the literature and to find where they fit in or between these texts. So yeah, that's sort of a real summation of what we've done across the board. But um, yeah, that's
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the things that and I think Kate was referring to this as she was talking about Beloved, which again, for our seniors, I don't know if any of the folks on the call are parents of seniors or have been parents of St. Andrews seniors, even if your current students are younger. But, Toni Morrison's Beloved has become this, well, it was a legendary text outside of St. Andrews, obviously, for decades. But within St. Andrews and sort of within St. Andrews student culture, because it has been a sort of keystone text for the senior year, it has come to hold this sort of special, almost mythic in the best sense status for seniors. They have the sense of the challenge of Beloved as being one of the most exciting things that they're looking forward to, they're anticipating over the course of their time at St. Andrews. The younger students hear the older students talking about the experience of Beloved and how it is really a transformational reading experience. And so I think, that cultivation of not just individual loves of reading and a sense of the power of reading, but a kind of culture of readers is something that I think we're working to build at St. Andrews. And again, that goes back, as Kate was saying, all the way to asking students to do a summer reading that is initially an individual text that they're reading by themselves over the summer, but then to come in and to actually have that be a kind of entry point into building class cultures and class communities in the first weeks of the year. So, again, I think of a passage from Marianne Wolf where she talks about how I was saying earlier that deep reading can change our consciousness. And she specifically says, we learn to feel what it means to be despairing and hopeless or ecstatic and consumed by unspoken feelings. And, that kind of experience, the ways that kind of deep reading that our students are doing with a text like Beloved is really, they themselves see it as transformational, as Kate was saying. They can recognize that as they're having that experience. So one of the things, of course, that we recognize that is a challenge right now that we're sort of navigating as teachers and students alike, all of us, you may have felt this yourselves, but is just all of the ways that a digital culture, all of the ways that a culture that is about fast information, a culture that doesn't, in the larger sense of culture, doesn't promote deep reading, that it actually is something that we see ourselves as needing to work intentionally to cultivate as a sort of, again, habit and appreciation, as something that we know that some students may not have as much experience with as maybe they once did, either in terms of what they've been reading in their middle school classrooms as they're coming here, or even just what students might spend time over a vacation doing. And so, we are well aware, and one of the things we are intentional about trying to do is to help students see that sort of reading is a habit. Reading is a habit that we want them to build. We want them to build their sort of stamina to read and to read great works and challenging works in the ways that we were just describing, right? To build up towards a text like Beloved in their senior year, but that a lot of that happens just by reading. And in some sense, sort of the best way to cultivate a love of reading and the stamina for reading is to read and to sort of dip into to find things that catch you and your passion and your attention, and to sort of build from there. And so that's part of our argument, again, as you sort of think about how your students may spend their summers and the variety of opportunities that they will have to get remunerative jobs and to, maybe be attending a camp or a program of some kind. There's a whole range of things that they can be doing with their summers, as you start to plan those now, or even, with a break like the upcoming one that they would be very quick to tell you starts in what, 72 hours, not even that. But to think about how reading might be actually a part of those, something that is worth sort of being intentional about finding space for in those breaks. And that's something that I think, again, would really make the case for, not just in terms of sort of what it does for them as learners, as thinkers who will return to classrooms here, but what it does for them as human beings and what it does for them as citizens. I mean, thinking about Woolf in her book talks about the importance of practicing those analytical reading skills and how those are skills of citizenship, the ability to, as she puts it, discern truth so that you're not susceptible to misinformation and disinformation, that's actually in really important ways done through reading and through cultivating that kind of critical analytical thinking that reading activates in our brains. So I think as we sort of think about your students as whole people and where we're really trying to cultivate that wholeness, that you have been raising them in, that we're really thinking about reading as a part of that process. So, I mean, that's sort of a lot of our pitch. We'd love to, especially with given our small numbers, to sort of open it up and create opportunities for you all to ask questions, for us to talk in dialogue with one another. We'd love to hear about books that you're reading. We'd love to hear about books that have been transformative for you, or for your student that maybe you can recommend to another family member on this call to buy as a holiday present or something like that. But yeah, we'd love to hear your questions and hear your thoughts. So please, Christina. So in terms of sort of trajectories at St. Andrews, I think there's a little bit of a both and. I think, the culture here in all the ways that we described is very much a bookish place. And so I think there are deep readers. Our students are deep readers, but sometimes it's a little harder to sort of draw that out of them than perhaps it once was because they don't have as much experience with it. Again, or what they're reading in that way that Wolf talks about as sort of skimming for information because we're bombarded. I mean, in some sense, students are actually reading probably more, they may be consuming as many or more words than students before them ever were because of what if they're reading things on their phone and sort of doing that skimming kind of read. But it's really about that sort of deeper kind of reading. And I think, I do think there are challenges in terms of sort of stamina and attention, as you were describing for reading. And I think that's something that, we're working really intentionally in our classrooms to be building, again, both with the ways that we have students read, how we scaffold that, how we teach them to annotate so that they're constantly in conversation with the text that they're reading. And also things, even just the work that we're doing in our classrooms that is sustained work that, we're a place where students are not allowed to have their computers open unless we specifically ask them to for a particular work that they're doing. And that's in part because we want to build this ability to sustain deep engagement and attention in those kinds of ways. I mean, one of the other things that I've noticed too a little bit is I think extensive reading is one of the ways that we build our vocabulary and one of the ways that we build a love of just sort of learning in words. That sense of discovery. And again, those are things, that sense of discovery is something that we're working really intentionally to activate with students, and we have a student body that they're amazing and they can be activated in those kinds of ways, but they aren't always finding that before they come to St. Andrews through literature in some of the ways you're describing. So I think I think there have been some changes that make it maybe a little bit more challenging, or we sort of feel like we're working to be really intentional about that work of cultivating it. So yeah, but I think your instinct that some of it is about just identifying things that students can get really excited about reading, that there's something really, really meaningful and worthwhile about that, um, even if it's not sort of the densest or most complex work, that any reading is going to do some of that activation and as a foundation from which we can continue to build. So I'll let Kate take over because I'm sure you have some thoughts too, even about sort of the kinds of texts that can be those bridges and things like that.
Yes, thank you so much. So, nice to meet you. So I have a son too, and he is now 18, and he's a senior at another boarding school. And it's been interesting. So he is an avid reader, but so what I did with him, and it's different depending on the ages, obviously. And he gives me a hard time about it now because he said, Mom, most of my friends weren't raised the way that I was raised. And we had this sort of philosophical conversation about what that means. But what he said is that so he figured out now later in life that when I would ask him about it was the boxcar children, when he would come down and talk to me about Jack and Annie, I acted like it was like this, they were real. And I would ask them, oh my gosh, what happened? And we would get all involved in the conversation of it. Now, this was when he was much younger. And then I also used to require him to read for periods of time in order, I mean, this is when he was much younger, but it was a chore of sorts. But I build the endurance with that process. What we do now is it's funny because he's actually read War and Peace for fun, which is a massive text. Exactly. And East of Eden. And I mean, he's really, really an avid reader because of the sort of progress that we made when he was younger. But quick side note and how it connects is so Toni Morrison talks about one of her essays called Invisible. It's this essay called Invisible Ink. And what invisible ink is, it's that sort of space between the text and the reader that we connect to, that we see ourselves in. And to your point about exposing your son to multiple different types of text, you're absolutely right. It's about finding something, whether it be an author or a genre or a style of some sorts that's a combination of it that just clicks for him. And it will happen. It's just constantly trying to find and invite. The older they get, the more it is about inviting rather than telling. But it's also like a shared experience. My son always sees me reading. We talk all the time about the books that we're reading. And I also got that from my parents. So growing up, my mom, I have vivid memories of her going out to the backyard and sitting on our bridge and reading for like hours at a time. And I used to just crawl out, like I'd run out to the backyard and I would just sit next to her where she was reading, also sitting on her bed and reading. So I think when the more they see us, and as much as they resist us as they get older, they're also still watching us all the time. And I think it really does impart for them a memory that then becomes part of who they are as well. So I think the exposure to a variety of genres. I also used to treat Barnes and Noble like it was a toy store. So we would go into Barnes and Noble and he would pretty much get his pick of a book, or two sometimes if he was really excited. And so that was the other ways. It was sort of like I made it really fun and engaging in the process of if it was like it was not a chore, even though it was kind of a chore at times for making sure that he continued to build the endurance, but it became just part of our lifestyle. So yeah, it's a combination, but you and the other th it's like everything else in life, you just don't stop doing the things that you love and or encouraging them to build that love because it's life altering. Like I was in Japan with him for Thanksgiving, and one of my favorite texts earlier when I was in college was Memoirs of a Geisha. Did I think I knew what Japan was like? Absolutely. Was it anything like I read in the books? Absolutely not. But it still built a bridge for me to feel some level of comfort to step into this completely different world, right? Um, and so that's what, yeah, I think everyone knows. Like once I start talking about books, and I was kidding around with Emily before we got on here, I'm like, I get more nervous about reading something on a pulpit for lessons and carols than I do talking about books because it's just part of who I am now. So yeah, I think those are multiple ways, and I think it, believe it or not, it seeps in with our children when they see us doing that which we purport, right? And so those are just a few of the ways.
Yeah, one of the fun things that the students do, so there's actually a vacation book club here where a student club will choose a book that then students can read over vacation for any of the longer breaks and then come back and discuss informally in a book sort of book club kind of discussion. So that might be a an interesting question to ask is sort of what the vacation book club read is. um, but also, I think one of the things that might be fun too is to, as you all are talking to your students about the things that they're reading here, invite them to make a recommendation to you. Maybe of a book that they've particularly enjoyed that they've been reading. We found, in addition to the vacation book club, before one of the longer breaks last year, we invited students and adults, but what was most exciting was to see students making recommendations, but to recommend books to each other. The framework that we used, a professor of mine had talked about books that move the furniture in the room. So the idea, like after you've read this book, everything just looks a little different for you because you've been immersed in the world of this book. And, we asked students to identify books that had moved the furniture in the room for them and share them with one another. And one of the things that was really fun is that I think students, because they were seeing these recommendations from each other, that was really sort of inspiring to them. In some cases, it was even sort of, oh, that's someone that I'd love to have a conversation with. So maybe I'll go read that book and then we'll talk about this book. So I think there are opportunities, the ways that reading is very much something that we do in community ultimately, or discussing those books, as well as, the ways that over a break reading can be a really nice sort of decompression into our own worlds as well as bringing us out to other ones.
I was just reading Rick's comment in the chat, and I think it's great. I love that idea of you mentioned reading together as a family, even just for half an hour. I think that's absolutely a great idea. And whether you're reading different texts or similar texts to share the ideas, I think that's excellent. I do think it is kind of interesting though when you're reading something and someone else is reading something else. I often feel this desire to sort of read whatever it is that they're reading, especially when they're really invested in it. And so oftentimes in my family too, my mom, every time she reads a book, she'll call me on the phone. She'll be like, "Have you read this?" And so she usually passes off whatever hard copy she's got, and we always end up talking about whatever it is that we've passed along. So I think that's a really great recommendation. Um, and then also you mentioned about reading in the summer. Absolutely. And also in breaks. Some of this, I mean, what Emily said, I'll just reiterate also about several of the students came back from Thanksgiving and were talking about how they had already reread their novella that they were going to do their exhibitions on, and some of them are even asking, "Oh, can I read another one of them, even though I may not be doing my essay on that?" So, to Emily's point, also, again, it's the culture of what we've built at St. Andrews is so rich with the reading. That it's pervasive and it's really great. And it is nice to see ninth graders coming through the third form. I'm happy to hear that your son is enjoying his classes, and it's already starting for him. That's really great. Um, so yeah, there was another comment on the, oh, seventh grade son is listening. Any book recommendations for a seventh grade? I'll have to think about that. I think part of it is, again, it's I would encourage going together, whether it be the public library or a library, or going to Barnes and Noble and perusing the different aspects and reading through some of the summaries, and having a conversation about what interests you. Um, I mean, we can give you lists, but again, I do think largely it's about how do you connect with the text or the ideas or the stories that are happening, and whatever's there. Or have you read something that you would recommend for him to read that you guys could talk about? I most recently just finished Demon Copperhead, and that was the big family read that's been passed through that my mom read, and then she passed it to me, and then I read it over three-quarters over the summer. I had to pause for a moment, and then I just finished it, and absolutely a book that moved the furniture for me. So I'll be passing that to my son to read in addition to his other work over the winter break. But
And I do think, again, we had such success before that break with students recommending to other students that model of sort of, and again, I think the ways that that cultivates that sense of sort of other people are readers too. This is something that we're all doing in ways that are really lovely. So, I think the another resource is that summer reading, not the assigned summer readings for each grade, but our summer reading list where faculty members recommended books that they have loved or that they were excited to read themselves and were inviting students to read with them. I think that's a great list to go to, and it would be a great opportunity if your student is already at St. Andrews. I think Kenzie maybe was asking, to be able to look and see and say, have your students say like, oh, here's this faculty member that I've sort of wanted to get to know better. And so maybe there's a book on that list that they recommended that looks exciting, looks interesting, and pick it up. And I can guarantee that there are a few things that would make a St. Andrews faculty member happier than a student coming up and saying, over this past break, I read this book that you had recommended for the summer. Could we go and get coffee and talk about it? And I can guarantee that's like the fastest way to get a trip into town from a faculty member probably is to have that kind of a conversation. So I think there would be some suggestions probably on that list that might connect as well. And again, where one of your students, if they're a current student, might look at that and say, oh, like I think I would like that book because this teacher that or this coach that I have or this dorm parent that I have is recommending it. Rick, you were asking about this is sort of a broader part of a broader conversation about not overscheduling the summer. I think that is absolutely something that we very much believe in. I think um, and again, I think particularly not overscheduling in with the sort of things that um, feel like programming. I think there's a little bit of a difference between like getting a summer job and sort of the kind of agency that gives students and something where it's more sort of they're suddenly very programmed for the summer. Their lives here are very structured and very busy, and there's lots of good reason for that in terms of what they're looking to and wanting to do here, the things they're wanting to take advantage of. But there's so much good evidence in terms of all sorts of things, in terms of developing independence, in terms of the power of having free time to just sort of daydream and think and be bored and creative because of that. There's so much good evidence that, again, especially if it's sort of students are using that unprogrammed, unstructured time to find and develop new passions and loves, things that they can pursue, things where they can feel that sense of agency and that sense of independence and choice. That there's so much good evidence of sort of how powerful that is for them as as people, as much as sort of broadly, as much as thinkers. So certainly as we are making the pitch for reading as a part of that, it's also more broadly about not over scheduling the summer. That doesn't mean we're certainly not saying your students should not be doing anything over the summer, but really, having them also just have that time to again to be reflective. I think in a variety of kinds of ways, and that might look like different things in your different families or home contexts or cultures, but that opportunity to really slow down and be reflective and to think metacognitively as well as to be building on things that are interests that they've developed while they've been here or over one part of the summer into another, that we really see value in that. Absolutely. Are there other thoughts, questions, comments?
This is the practiced we're good with holding wait time if there anyone. Sometimes this happens in our English classroom and our history classrooms, right? This is really, I'm really appreciating your questions about this. It does go to a lot of what we think and talk about in the English department about, our why and what we do. And ultimately, it always does come back to, our love of reading. It's also largely just about helping them understand themselves too, right? So even though they're reading about these characters that they may or may not connect with, there's still an aspect more often than not that they see themselves, whether reflected in or just how they're different, right? And I've really enjoyed that part of it as well. Students have really navigated these characters and the challenges. And then in the spaces, they challenge each other in thinking about a different perspective if they don't actually relate and another student in the classroom does. One of the great things about St. Andrews being a boarding school with students from all over the world. It's been really great to have some insights from different perspectives from real lived experiences that you don't necessarily get in a public school as well or in a day school. It's there's a familiarity and there's a trust that's built that I've really I knew it when I first stepped into it, but you can really see it, especially by senior year. There's a real there is a culture of a willingness to be vulnerable and I think that's one of the barriers that some people have in reading is that when you can't really talk about a text that you've read and that you've it's sort of like moved things for you. Uh, I think that can be a barrier for loving literature. But I think because we do it so much in the classrooms and in the dining hall very frequently too. We'll talk about some of the texts that we're reading, whether it be in class or out of class. By normalizing that vulnerability, I think it also has really opened some doors for a lot of our students that wouldn't have otherwise been opened.
I spent the end of the afternoon talking with my students about in the interdisciplinary class for seniors that I teach um, about Beloved, which as we've been referring to, all the seniors are reading, and so my students are doing the work now of sort of putting it into conversation with some historical sources. And one of them had literally said, I think I now have to go read every other book by Toni Morrison. So I said I can fully endorse that that as a thought. So um and Moby Dick. I was just talking with a colleague about that, and about he too had read it in high school, and had it be a mind-blowing experience. So lots of great recommendations here.
It's interesting. Growing up, I read Pride and Prejudice quite a few times just for fun when I was younger. So I was always worried about teaching it and like sort of no longer loving it after I taught it. Uh, and it's been an interesting dance. I do find the more that I infuse a little bit of joy in the process of reading it, the more joy comes back from the students. But I have not lost my love for Pride and Prejudice in the process of teaching it, which I'm very grateful for as well. Um, I am impressed about reading Moby Dick. That is, I worked in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is like exactly, and they do a live a continual read and they pass it along of Moby Dick up there. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's a really interesting read-in that they do up there in New Bedford. So
And I just dropped into the chat if anyone's looking for a nonfiction read. We have historian Sophia Rosenfeld, who teaches at UPenn, coming to speak at St. Andrews later this winter. And she's got a book that I will admit I haven't yet read. In fact, it is what I'm planning to read over this break, one of the things at least. But this great book that's a history of the idea of choice. So it's called The Age of Choice, a history of freedom in modern life. And so we're really excited to have her coming and to have some students have the chance to read some of her work with that. So, all right. Well, if there aren't any other last questions or recommendations, well, thank you all for coming. And certainly, we would love to hear from you with other book recommendations, other observations that you have about your students as readers, other questions. Please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us or to your students' English or history teacher or religion and philosophy, and really any again, part of what's magical about being in the community of St. Andrews is that all of our faculty and again, so many of our students, and we're cultivating it intentionally, are readers. So, you could get a great book recommendation from probably just about anyone. So if you're picking up your student on Wednesday, feel free to cheerfully accost someone and ask them for a book recommendation for the break. So thanks so much for coming and have wonderful times with your students over the break. We know that they are eager to see you and that you're eager to see them. So um, we hope that you have a wonderful family time together with them.
thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.